Now that I have completely psyched myself out, there are those who have probably been waiting for about 5 years or so for me to cover Alien, and it's finally time to talk about this wretched abomination and the molecular acid it contains, as well as the benefits of what that might be over regular blood, and also discuss the lateral genetic exchange that is clearly going on between the facehuggers and humans. A ship as the Nostromo would be returning home from a mining operation in deep space, only to have the crew awoken up early by the ship's computer known as Mother. Seemingly their ship had just happened upon a signal on a planet near the Zeta Reticuli system, which is actually pretty interesting and way off topic, but the video I covered on Roanoke Tales, there are a couple who claimed to have been harassed by aliens and they looked somewhat human but not entirely. Well, when they were hypnotized, they were able to draw a map of the star system that showed where the aliens were from, which was the Zeta Reticuli system. Now, there have been a lot of counter arguments to that drawing, but it was interesting that this also takes place within the same system. But moving on, upon touching down on the primordial planet, everyone would leave any sense of coordination or self-preservation behind, immediately bringing back something with them, as the crew would be outmatched, kicking off a survival against the alien. But the question is, how does this species work concerning its genetics, and how is it able to incorporate an entirely different species such as Homo sapiens genetic codings hailing from another world entirely? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode. But first, this episode is sponsored by Dr. Squatch's soap. It's getting colder outside, which means we are all going to be packed like sardines in a can together, and I can tell you the last thing you want is someone sitting next to you that smells like a literal sardine, but more to the point, you don't want to smell like one either. If that's the case, and it should be the case, I know there's gamers out there who need to listen to this, then it's time to get yourself some really good smelling soap. Dr. Squatch currently has a deal running for all new customers: buy 3 soaps and get 3 soaps totally free, which is a savings of $28 that you can then use to go buy more soap. Scents like Cool Fresh Aloe, Bay Rum, Wood Barrel Bourbon, and my personal favorite, because I like earthy scents, Pine Tar, amongst many others. And you know, Wood Barrel Bourbon is actually pretty close behind that in terms of the smell, because I do like the wood smell of like a barrel and just a hint of bourbon. So if you're ready to not smell like you just crawled out of the depths of the gamer room, then by clicking the link in the description, you too can smell amazing. Alright, let's get back to it. So we kick off our story with, alright, I do have to warn you, I'm still going to make sarcastic jokes. I know it's a masterpiece, so let's get that out of the way. But anyhow, the longest and slowest one-word intro ever. I thought maybe like I was tripping when I was sitting there and Alien was like slowly filling in, and it was only halfway done, like a minute and a half later. But then finally, the third rung of the E shows up and we're ready to go. We get the rundown. It's the Nostromo. There are 7 people on board, and they are carrying 20 million tons of mineral ore, and they are GTFOing back to Earth to get their payday. Heading into the ship, well, that's a depressing looking place. Imagine seeing that every day for like years. Throw a few panels over the electronics is all I'm saying. Like, at least make it a place worth being torn apart by an alien in. We hear a quiet clunky noise because this is based off 1970s technology, which hilariously we see as way inferior now, but the 60s technology actually landed us on the moon, and now we just send like rovers up there. It's kind of lame. Like, anyways, if you think we didn't go to the moon, we actually have moon rocks that prove we went to the moon, and those have been studied in individual labs and not just government labs. We've been to the moon. Anyhow, something flashes up on screen to a computer as the ship's lights are activated and the crew are awoken from their hypersleep. So the first man to wake up, Kane, looks like kind of like when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you have to pee, but you still want to remain like sleepy. Eventually the crew gets up and starts pounding back black coffee and cigarettes. Ah, the 70s. Imagine burning through your oxygen supply just to smoke on a ship. Humanity is undefeated in the luxury department. The crew talks about how they feel dead. Yeah, imagine whatever chemical you've been huffing this entire time and absorbing that puts you in a coma for that long would take a while to clear out. Which I do want to bring something up. These pods that they're in, they seem to put a person in like a medically induced coma, right? Like more than anything, that's what it does, which means they're still aging by like a standard rate with their bodies continuing their metabolisms at a normal amount. And this would be absolutely horrifying if you think about it. Now, typically what we have with traversing long distances is the idea of being suspended in a fluid that puts no pressure at any particular point in the body. As we will come to find out, these people have literally been in a coma for 10 months because they're only halfway to Earth, which means they would have aged almost about 2 years getting out there and coming back. And given all the chain smoking, let's see, you go on about like 10 trips concerning a mining operation, 20 months out, a few months to mine that ore, and then 20 months back. You could spend 40 or 50 years doing this and in the blink of an eye for you. The other thing to take into consideration are the literal bed sores. When laying in a bed like that, which I don't know, why wouldn't you just turn off the gravity in their pod? People would 100% absolutely develop sores over a 20-month trip just laying there. To me, this whole thing seems like, you have a regular lifespan of about 80 years. It's over in a flash because really only like 20 of those years you're awake. Plus the smoking means like you go to bed without cancer and then wake up with stage 4 lung cancer and are like, whoops. I just had to bring this up as it's something that I noticed. Dallas then gets an alert to head into what I imagine is the captain's nest. Clocking in, he checks in with the ship's computer mother as the rest of the crew mans their stations to land as well. But as Lambert checks the computer, they can't find Earth. She calls out to Antarctica, but nobody answers. They then realize that they aren't actually in the Sol system. They are in the Zeta Reticuli system. The crew then assembles and realizes, well, we're only about halfway home. Mother woke them up 10 months early from Earth to check on an unknown signal that repeats every 12 seconds. Parker objects, saying he wasn't hired to do this, but technically speaking, any crew in space would likely be obligated to answer a signal as it could be distress. As they approach the planet, well, it looks pretty crappy out there. It's pretty far away from the sun, and let me tell you what else I don't like about this planet. It's an ugly world. An alien world. They send the cruiser down as it heads towards the rock. As they continue to use their metric system on the way down, makes me shudder just to think we would use those heathen units in the future. They begin their approach vector and realize the atmosphere is massively volatile. Continuing to descend, their ship isn't doing so hot. Like, this seemed like a pretty routine entry into a planet, and there's like losing paneling and the view of their decks. Not really sure how that happened there or why. Like, is it sabotage maybe? Or maybe this thing with exposed wires all on the inside and 2 engineers not really caring. The thing is falling apart, which is a pretty bold strategy considering that's how you're supposed to get home. It's never really discussed, but the ship should have been completely set up for this type of task, and yet it causes a fire on the inside of it, which then results in somehow there's a hull breach. Nice piloting, Captain Wow over here. They then call down to engineering as they're told it'll take 25 hours to fix everything. They call out on the channel of who's sending the message, but nobody answers. The sun of the planet is coming up shortly, and the signal is located about 2 kilometers away, or 1.24 miles in freedom units. A group of volunteers go to figure out what is sending the message as Ash acts like a complete weirdo running in place. Dallas, Kane, and Lambert all head out into the Winter Wonderland to begin their jaunt as Ash rolls up into position to watch them. Lambert complains about not being able to see, and I mean, I don't know, I can see. And you also find Lambert is sort of, well, she whines a lot about everything, and when it comes to anything, she's gonna start crying. Parker and Brett ask Ripley down in engineering about getting full shares rather than half shares, as if a company is going to alter the contract that you signed. No shot. If anything, they'd rather just use you as alien bait. Not wanting to engage with that nonsense about all of the shares and everything, she just sort of walks off. Lambert continues to gripe as she responds, "I like griping." Same. Am I Lambert? Probably. Ripley decides to run the transmission through her own parameters as it's just straight up binary coding, so in theory, it should be relatively easy to decipher. Meanwhile, back out on where Frozen took place, the storm is calmed with the rising sun as they spot a ship in the distance. This mountain is not a natural formation. That means someone built it. Thanks, Cortana. Couldn't have figured that one without you. And if you got that reference, because I pretty much just ruined the reference, you can be my friend. Lambert says that they should go out there as Kane says, "We have to go on. We must go on." No, you mustn't, but you want to. There's a big difference. Approaching the ship, I can only hope someone was able to outrun this thing by either going left or right when it fell instead of going in a straight line, with the part that can absolutely crush you. Then again, what sort of idiot would do that? It's preposterous. Entering the ship, it's clearly built by something other than humans and isn't just the inside of a mountain or anything like that. They crawl up to the middle of the ship where they find a rather large-looking alien. As we will come to find out, these things apparently seeded Earth to create man, and then it goes on a concussive rage randomly and starts taking everybody out. I'm sorry, Prometheus will be dunked on forever and always because it was really dumb. The engineers deeming Earth failed, which resulted in a spacefaring species, is a hell of a hot take. Humanity should destroy the engineers. I'm all for the engineer erasure. But as they examine the body, they find the bones were exploded outwards, and worst of all, he was likely bald. Heading to keeps.com/rope, Kane then finds a hidey hole in the ship where it likely wasn't engineered that way, which, I mean, it's always a good idea to go in there, I suppose. Yeah, let's go in the spooky hole next to the petrified bald alien body. At this point, Mother deciphered part of the transmission, and it looks like a warning. So Ripley says she's gonna go warn the crew as Ash is like, he's got the best logic ever saying, what's the point of going out there? By the time you get there, they'll know it's a warning. How exactly? Shouldn't you warn the crew that they could be walking into some mega contaminated space AIDS scenario? Oh, don't worry about that. When they contract space AIDS, they'll know it was a warning about space AIDS. It's all coming together. Also, don't these people have radios to communicate with the main ship? Like, what is going on? And so, side note, I watched Prometheus before I actually watched Alien, if you can believe it. I don't know if that's like heresy in the alien community, because I wasn't even born in 1979. I wasn't alive or a thing, so it happens. But I always thought the people like in Prometheus were acting in frustratingly stupid ways, but now it all makes sense. The engineers considered Earth a failure because it resulted in humans with absolutely zero survival instincts, or grace, or ability to stay alive, or use their brains, or not look into holes and get got. Except for Lambert, my girl knows what's up. As Kane descends into the hole, he says he's in a cave of some sort, you're in a ship, and it's like the tropics in here. And how can he feel it's like the tropics? As far as I know, his suit doesn't have a temperature reader on it, anyhow, it doesn't matter. I don't know, just seems a little weird. Hitting the ground, he sees literal eggs and doesn't GTFO. Brilliant. So we see two things now that makes Kane deserve what happened to him. First, he says there's a layer of mist above the eggs and reacts when broken. Bro, you were literally just moving your hand in the mist. Of course it reacts. Like, am I taking crazy pills, that statement or something? It's mist. It's moving air. Anyways, to that note, hey guys, if I throw myself off a building, it seems my body reacts when hitting the ground in a completely unexpected way. It's crazy. Next, by simply moving his hand, he falls like a huge nerd. The amount of non-coordination is otherworldly. Sports Star over here then falls into the eggs, where he forgets the #1 rule of humanity: don't put your face in front of anything that opens. And this holds true for many holes in life. Moving on, one of the eggs opens, and would you look at that, he gets jumped. Who could have predicted this? Well, probably anyone, as this movie is like 47 years old next June. My God. Lambert and Dallas then drag Kane back to the ship and didn't call ahead for some reason, probably because they don't have radios. LOL. Okay. So Ash then goes to the inner airlock as Dallas says an organism attacked Kane. Ripley continues citing quarantine protocol, and I'm like all with her on this one. Like, no shot if I was in command and I knew quarantine that I'm letting a literal alien on board. You have no idea what this thing is, what sort of microbes are on it, if it has acid blood, if it wants to hug your face, if it has tiny little extra mouth that can punch through your skull. You just don't know. Go hang out outside for 24 hours of the ship, my brothers and sisters in Christ, because you aren't getting on this ship. Luckily, Ash there is, though, to ruin the party, committing what is basically like putting a turd in the punch bowl by letting this thing on board. Nicely done, bro. Breaking open Kane's helmet, the thing is holding his face tighter than my first girlfriend. This actually shows, with what we will see later, which I'm pretty sure we are all familiar with, that the facehugger's blood can be used to crack through protective barriers, which is exactly what it did here to gain access through Kane's suit to his meat suit. It surmises that this thing must be feeding him oxygen and keeping him alive. As they try to remove it, it holds on tighter. Parker suggests freezing the thing, which is absolutely the move. Putting him in a scanner though, they do an internal scan and spot a fleshy tube being pushed down his throat. There are quite a few jokes that I could make here actually, but this is a really highbrow channel, is what I would say if this was a highbrow channel. Much like a first boyfriend. Anyway, so they're going to cut this thing off at this point where we see the first issue. As they make an incision, blood falls to the deck where it begins eating through the flooring. Running to the second deck, it's already burning through there as well, and then running to the third, the acid is finally neutralized enough to not eat through that deck. They take a sample and then wonder if it's just a defense mechanism or if it's using it for blood. Continuing their repairs, they also end up just leaving Kane exposed to the world. Again, it's an alien, and clearly it attacks people. Why is he not in like a sealed pod of some sort? This totally explains Prometheus now. So Ash continues to work as everyone just kind of casually comes in, like Ripley, potentially exposing themselves to all sorts of microbes and alien acids. Wonderful. Like, that thing could be emitting toxic gas for all you know. Ripley then scolds Ash for going against quarantine as Ash explains what this thing is. It's got all the greatest hits, you know, the outer layer of protein polysaccharides, which then he sheds his cells and replaces them with polarized silicon, which makes the creature even more resistant to environmental conditions. So obviously, we have to talk about this. First and foremost, polysaccharides, for those who don't know, those are essentially things that can be broken down into smaller molecules utilized for the metabolism to run the animal. What I find interesting about the facehugger in general is the lifespan of this creature. As stated by Ash, the polysaccharides appeared to be there, but eventually it's shed, or more likely utilized by the body for energy, and this is replaced by polarized silicon, which makes it more resistant to the atmosphere. You can think of the protein polysaccharides in its body as like fat on the human body, really. It's an energy source for the facehugger to draw from, but there is one critical issue. The facehugger does not appear to really eat anything or really gain any nutrients from the host. It has one job: infect and then die. Because of this, it's like a limited gas tank that makes it tougher over time as the fuel source is replaced by other cells, and that continues to make it tougher and giving it a better chance of infecting the longer the creature is operational, at least from what I can tell. But then we come to the question that everyone always has: the creature's blood. Is it an actual defense mechanism, or is it useful as literally just blood? Now, there are a few things we need to realize about the alien species in comparison with our own biology of our species. You can think of humanity as like a rechargeable battery, so to speak. When we eat, nutrients enter our stomachs, which are then broken down by the acids we have, and then they head to the small intestine, where the body will pull nutrients from the food into the bloodstream, where it will be used as fuel for our body. We do that to the point of about like 70 to 90 years, and then we drop. However, with aliens, it's important to note that not only is their lifespan much shorter than humans, but their metabolism is set up completely different from ours. When it comes to the alien blood, there is no actual explanation as to what sort of acid it is. Kyle Hill, actually also his words known as Discount Thor, did an excellent video over the chemistry behind the blood. And I mean, I'm a microbiologist, not a chemist, but you know, your boy is still willing to throw his 2 cents in. But if you would like to know the actual breakdown of the chemistry, I didn't want to just like jack his video, so I would definitely recommend going and looking at it. But Kyle stated that the blood was a molecular acid such as hydrofluoric acid. That acid is incredibly nasty and has a habit of burning through virtually anything, and actually makes it very difficult to store it as well. If it does land on you, it would send you into cardiac arrest because it leaches all the calcium out of your bloodstream while melting your meat suit. It's a pretty nasty stuff. But for the alien to have this fluid to burn through the decks, along with this, it would obviously need some fairly strong bonds to allow for its meat suit to stay together in order to survive. Like, let's say the vessels were the only thing holding it, and then you cut that, it would burn through its own body. Kyle actually proposed that in some ways it must have Teflon bonds within its body which can resist hydrofluoric acid, allowing for the alien to survive. But I think it's something else, because it is actually never confirmed as to what it is, but it is important to remember. I am standing on the shoulders of giants when discussing the blood of the alien, because it's such a long debated topic as to what it actually is and how it operates. But there is one chemical in reality, which is not hydrofluoric acid, that would allow for everything that we see concerning what happens to aliens when they are attacked, along with what type of metabolism it has and how it's sort of communicating in its body. And these context clues lead me to believe it's something besides hydrofluoric acid. But to understand that, we first need to get to the second stage of its life cycle. Later on, Ash then calls out to Dallas as he tells him to come to the infirmary. They open the door and realize the alien is now gone from Kane's face. Conducting a search, it takes a while, but eventually it falls on Ripley, freaking her out. They poke it and realize it's having a reflex, but the creature is done. This thing quite literally blew its load and hit the road. That's the way I'm sure we all want to go. That was kind of gross. But it would appear at this point the creature had used up all of its energy in the process of infecting Kane, and once this was done, the cells had no more energy to draw from, which led to its rapid end. Kinda sucks to be these aliens, really. Looking at its body, they find flaps and folds where it suctions to the face, as Ash says they need to study it and bring it back with them. Dallas gives Ash the call as Ripley objects. She asks if Dallas has ever actually shipped with Ash before, and she doesn't trust him. Ripley continues to tell him that they can't take off yet, but Dallas goes for it once, he realizes, oh, it's just a couple of decks and cameras missing and plating and, everything that's important with the engines to keep them cool. We'll go ahead and jeopardize everyone. Thanks, Captain. The ship then makes it, though, as they reconnect with the main ship and begin their return back to Earth. Back on the ship, Parker keeps saying to just go ahead and freeze Kane. I agree. Parker knows what's up. Lambert lets everyone know it's 10 months back to Earth as they all complain like they won't be asleep through it, as they get a call from Ash as he tells everyone to come to the infirmary. Kane has woken back up and remembers nothing. Also, I don't know what that outfit is, bro, but it looks like he got into his grandmother's closet or something. So they eat one last meal before going back to the big sleep. As Kane starts eating, kind of looks like he's coughing, but really there's something starting to move in him. They place him on the table as he starts convulsing, and I can't remember where I read this or heard this, but apparently they didn't tell the crew while filming that this thing was gonna burst out of his chest. So when he started bleeding, that was real shock on everyone's faces, and that's why they all stopped and looked around like, are we still filming? So as the alien then exits singing "Hello my honey, hello my ragtime gal," or whatever it says, it runs off from the table and hides. They should have snapped that thing's neck right there and they would have been totally fine. But now they get to conduct a search on a giant ship for something that's the size of a houseplant. Like looking for a needle in a needle stack, really. So now they yeet Kane's body out into space, which okay, you couldn't have put him in the freezer or something? You clearly had one. I think his family might have wanted his body to bury it, but hey, I guess not. Why not? Burial at space. But I do want to clear up a misnomer about the alien species and more specifically go into how this thing is even formed in the first place. It involves genetics, so you know it's going to be fun. First, the facehugger does not actually just implant an embryo into the body of a person to make it grow. If it did this, you would have to ask yourself, how does it incorporate the host species' genetic profile into its own build? We see this most prominently featured amongst the variant of alien known as the Predalien, which is a combination of the Yautja species and an alien. Considering this was humanity's first interaction with this species, it would be hard to identify exactly what was alien and what was like coming from humans, but with the Predalien to serve as a comparison, it becomes more clear. For instance, the Predalien not only had the dreadlocks and mandibles of the Yautja species, but also tends to mutilate their prey to obtain trophies like the predator species. If an embryo was the only thing implanted, then these traits would not have been passed along as effectively. The master debaters out there state that one side of this combination is an unintended consequence of the merging of two species, that there's also like bound to be some sort of bleed over effect. I personally fall on the side that it's intentionally based on what the facehuggers are actually injecting. The facehugger species is not so much injecting an embryo to gestate within a person, but a form of the black goo that the engineers use to turn a dead world into a living one. Essentially being thousands of microscopic organisms, this goo has the uncanny ability to unzip DNA of an animal, plant, or whatever, and then utilize the DNA for its own creations, serving as a basis. And this is imperative as this would immediately give any species a blueprint on how to survive on a world with very specific parameters such as like atmospheric gases being different than like a pure form of alien that it could survive in, as well as dealing with gravitational variations and the local fauna. Because there is one great equalizer out there for probably even the aliens, if they become infected with something else, then that could disrupt their own biochemistry and then they would be destroyed. Upon the facehugger injecting this black goo into the human host, most likely their stomach and or possibly their lungs, it's not really stated exactly where it goes, but the original alien species' own genetic profile is there, as this is clearly a version of the black goo that has been corrupted or at least altered by this original species. You can think of it this way: the original engineered material spawned life, and now that life uses it to spread its influence like a parasite to overtake and overcome all other forms of life. Because of this ability, roughly 80 to 85% of the alien genome remains intact through the process with desirable genes from the host species plucked out. Things like bone structure, bipedalism, metabolism, the ability, well, maybe metabolism, we'll kind of get there, but the ability to deal with a certain amount of atmosphere, hunting instincts, which for humans we will see is pretty much ambushing, which is something Homo sapiens has long enjoyed doing. I know we're persistent hunters, but usually we would like get a woolly rhino to come to one area and then we would ambush it. We've been doing that with larger animals forever, but a little more lithe of a frame than say like the Predaliens because it's coming from humans. This 10 to 15% of DNA transferred from the host is unzipped, snipped out by the black goo, which is likely just a form of the super engineered restriction in a nuclease of sorts, which cuts the DNA molecule. Rather than just, having it at one particular place though, it's like a string of coding, which would then be added into the DNA strand of the original alien species. Now this would require actual intervention by technology and engineering to work, as anything natural is not going to specifically know which genes are going to function. So there appears, whether it was intentional or linked back to it or something, that there may be like a data bank of sorts to draw from to kind of know which genes are supposed to be used. But because humans were created by the engineers in this universe, and as such, those genes should be known to the black goo, that makes us susceptible to alien infection and recombination of our genes to create the actual alien drone. And this may sound odd to you, as like the drones, they don't have all their DNA that they need, but actually we see this on our own planet. Within ants, it's known as haplodiploidy. When a diploid queen, meaning she's a queen, and let's say for bees, for instance, they have 32 chromosomes or 16 pairs. When they lay their eggs, the unfertilized eggs only have 16 chromosomes. When an egg is fertilized with 16 more chromosomes that are like added in, this will create either another queen through the addition of like royal jelly, if I remember correctly, or a diploid worker. In humans, an unfertilized egg is not viable and will be ejected. However, within bees and ants, amongst many other insects, unfertilized eggs will continue to progress to the point that they have become haploid drones. They possess half of the chromosomes, but are absolutely still viable and carry out work. And this is what stops a bunch of queen bees or queen ants from arising and destroying the colony, and it's all based on if the egg is fertilized or not. And even if it's unfertilized, the insect can survive and the alien can survive. When the facehugger attaches to a host, it will inject its 85% of DNA to make the alien, and then the 15% of the DNA of the host will be integrated, making it essentially like a fertilized egg, creating a zygote that is a combination of both, but mostly alien. It should also be noted that other drones can remain functional and are called pure drones or pure aliens with just their 80%, and I would have to assume those would arise on worlds that are like most native to the alien species already, so they can remain pure and deal with the environment. In worlds not yet overrun, the initial push requires drones to be able to survive the elements, and as such requires space within their own genome to incorporate host genes effectively to survive. But I bet you're wondering how this actually happens. Well, the black goo, you can think of it as like a cell itself, or a multitude of cells that are alien in origin. The process works very similar to conjugation amongst prokaryotes. In conjugation, another prokaryote will either happen upon a destroyed bacterial cell or a living one where they will exchange plasmids through a tube that forms, which can make the prokaryote more adept at living in that environment. Things like antibiotic resistance, for instance, is something that is shared amongst bacterial cells in this way. The same process has been documented in eukaryotes, just not as much, which is exactly how it's going to work with the black goo. While our cells are pretty closed off from undergoing this process in multicellular organisms, when the black goo enters the body, these tubes will forcibly spear nearby cells, conducting a forced process known as a horizontal gene transfer, or HGT. It's also known as a lateral gene transfer. Upon doing so, the cell membrane is pierced along with the nucleic membrane. As this happens, likely an engineered form of helicase is released, which unzips the DNA, and then that DNA is snipped from certain corresponding genes the black goo is looking for from the hypothesized databank. From here, these are pulled into the black goo cell while the human cell is basically destroyed. It's like having a piece of your brain removed, and as the black goo cell undergoes rapid differentiation and growth, resulting in the embryo growth. Now, it should be noted the databank I'm referring to, this is already basically coded into the black goo so it knows what it's looking for. It's not like it's communicating with something far away. But where were we? Ah yes, blasting the body out of the airlock. After making that knee-jerk reaction, Ash then hands them an instrument that detects micro changes in air density. How is that going to actually find that thing? I imagine because the air stays like disturbed, but finding that thing through a doorway seems impossible to me. More so when these are probably like airtight doors in case of a hull breach, but don't think too much about it. The crew then splits up into teams of 3 to go search. Approaching one area, they think it's hiding in a locker, but opening the door, it is instead the other perfect organism, whose structural perfection is matched only by its hostility. It's a Mrs. Kitty, or in this universe, its name is Jonesy. Brett then drops the ball and doesn't catch the cat because, now it's a cat, but he's informed that the microdensity whatever it is tracking the cat, because that makes sense, so they need to remove the cat in order for it to track the alien, because if they put the cat somewhere else, it won't track the cat. Okay, so Brett then goes off on his own to get the cat, and I guess Ripley and Parker just hang out and smoke, I don't know. Conducting his search, he heads into the creepy floating chain area where he finds the creature has shed its skin, which is never a good sign as that means it's growing, and grow it did. After standing in where is this water coming from and why is it free flowing? Seems like sort of a rust and tetanus issue, but he seems to enjoy his final shower, I suppose, probably because everyone just stays sweating in this movie, and there has been no scene where anyone throws on any deodorant yet. Also, they just woke up from a 10-month nap. Everyone has got to be smelling rank. Finding the kitty hiding, it begins backing away, growling and hissing. Just like when I have to take Mrs. Kitty to the vet. Brett turns around and realizes the alien has straight up turned into a pumpkin head-sized creature, which, it's spooky season, and I actually have covered that before. And the thing is rather tall if you've never seen Pumpkinhead. It then uses his extra eel jaw to, I assume, break through his skull, ending him almost immediately while the kitty watches. But since we finally got a look at this creature, let's take an actual look at it and show how the human genome is affecting its physiology. Starting with the feet, we see they're actually shaped like a human's, except there is a protrusion on the back, but it is plantigrade. In later forms of aliens, they will walk on the balls of their feet, but this one walks on the balls and heels of its feet. The ones that walk on the balls of their feet do appear to be more quadrupedal than bipedal. Moving up the legs, we see they are shaped much like Homo sapiens in proportion to the body, though it is taller than a human, so the legs are longer. As we approach the pelvic region, it is still much like a human's, with the femurs connecting to the pelvis itself, but the area is much more heavily armored. Moving to the backside of the creature, where our tailbone is small, this creature's tail is much longer. This prehensile tail can be used to slash and stab at humans, but but it should be noted that compared to other aliens, the tail is much more lithe. Humans just aren't too big, and likely these smaller tailbones that we have translated into making its tail smaller. As we move up to the abdomen, this creature has a sucked-in appearance and absolutely no body fat, but a similar muscular build to a human concerning the abdominal muscles. The thoracic region shows that a ribcage is present, and around the back are several protrusions, likely hailing from the original alien species genetic coding, because we really don't have these protrusions at all. Moving up to the shoulders, the alien doesn't really have large shoulders at all, but given what we will talk about later about how the body operates, it's likely it has more contractility force than a human does. The arms are proportional on human standards, and since it's bipedal and not quadrupedal like other aliens, the arms do not need to be like a doubling set of legs, so they're not very big. The fingers are an interesting blending of both human and alien. There are technically 3 digits owing to like the genetics of the alien. However, 1 digit is the thumb, the middle digit is the index and middle finger fused, and the 3rd digit is the ring and pinky finger fused. Another thing pointing to human lineage is the lack of claws. They are instead very human-like fingers with just blunted nails. Moving up to the head, it's a face only a mother could love, to be honest with you. There are some instances where the skull just behind the front of the face is very human-like, but as you move further back, the rest of the brain is housed in an elongated crest that runs pretty far, probably about like 1.5 feet. The mouth houses several sharp teeth, and it always appears to be salivating to a degree, and within that jaw is a purely just absolutely alien thing. It's a secondary little jaw. This type of jaw is seen in things like eels, so it's not really like entirely without a purpose, but it is interesting that it exists at all given what we will talk about concerning the alien's metabolism and its need for food. The jaw, however, can shoot out at a high rate of speed, likely using a similar method as like the pistol shrimp, who can like crack through a crab's carapace with one punch. The same method of using a system of biological springs and latches is likely utilized, and it will fire out, breaking through solid bone. Overall, the alien stands at a staggering 7 feet tall, about 1 foot taller than any of the crewmen, and 14 inches taller than Ripley. Its skin has black coloring, but is almost completely smooth and featureless on its head, but it has many ridges, which we can assume to be almost like a chitinous armoring over the rest of its body for protection. It is quite powerful even for its size, easily overpowering anyone that gets near it, making it absolutely a lethal animal. But it's clear to me, after incorporating these specific key points of the human genome into its own DNA, the growth pattern clearly comes from the alien genetics. Humans just do not grow that quickly, and we also don't really molt either. It's hard to know exactly what the pure form looks like, but it's said to have a reddish hue of skin, and if we use the base model of a drone mixed with a human, then we can assume it must look somewhat like the alien on the ship. It is difficult to point out the differences, however, because as far as I can tell, there are not many depictions of a pure form. Back with the crew, apparently Parker and Ripley saw the thing and did nothing. We never saw like how they saw it, they just said they did, and Dallas at this point devises a really stupid plan. Trap it in the air vents, which it is using, and then blast it out of an airlock. I mean, that's not the stupid part, but it's the part that comes after. They ask Ash what they should do, as the alien has clearly already adapted to the atmosphere that humans use, but they don't know how it will react to temperature changes. So they're gonna bathe the thing in holy fire. Very human thing to do. The captain then asks Mother about terminating the alien and has no idea what he's talking about, as then he asks, well, what are my chances? If it doesn't know about the alien, why would it know about your chances based on your power level, bro? Like, just go do it. So Dallas enters the vents alone, galaxy brain move, to find what is basically a bipedal tiger, just more intelligent, seeing as it's mixed with human intellect. That is the boldest of strategies, Cotton. Moving through with the light facing his face rather than in front of him, he asks Ripley to close the hatches behind him. Lambert at this point detects the alien somehow, where we get the most annoying things start happening. Lambert's descriptive ability is awful. Entering the 3rd junction, Lambert sees the thing approaching him and then loses a signal. Finding goop on the ground, Lambert starts saying, "It's gotta be there!" Then it like almost starts crying like, bro, stop, calm down, you're being dumb. Dallas then climbs down the ladder to get away from the thing and then gets jump scared by the alien, clearly wanting a hug. Parker went in after and found only his flamethrower with no blood and no Dallas. Lambert does say something pretty smart though at this point: get off the ship and just get out of there and take your chances out in space. Ripley says they're gonna go with the original plan, blowing it out of the airlock. Ripley asks Ash if him or Mother have any idea on what to do, and Ash is like, oh, we're still collating. So she says screw that and then heads to the captain's nest. Ripley comes across basically a text log that says they're all expendable and they were sent there on purpose to find the alien and bring it back at any cost, even at their lives. Classic. Isn't capitalism great? The answer is yes, capitalism is awesome, but this version of capitalism is a nightmare. Ash appears at this point and commits a right proper domestic disturbance as he starts attacking Ripley. As she goes to exit, Ash then seals the door to the area, like tuck and roll Ripley. Also, something that must have been cut from the movie, Ash was leaking white fluid, right? I mean, he got grabbed by Ripley, but nothing crazy. And then as Ripley comes back from the second door, she has a nosebleed that came out of nowhere. Like, she was fine when the second door closed, but as she approached him, she just got a nosebleed. Now, it's weird. At this point, Ash starts going ham on him and starts tossing Ripley around like a baby in a dryer as he rolls up a magazine trying to suffocate her, as then the rest of the crew finds out they are fighting. They realize Ash is actually a mandroid, as Parker then knocks his head off, saving Ripley from a horrible 10 ways to please your man this fall cosmopolitan end. They end up reactivating his head and asking him how to take this thing out and what were his priorities. He says, "I can't lie to you about your chances," and then says the quote about being the perfect killing machine. He says, "You do have my sympathies," as Parker then lights his head on fire to destroy him entirely. So the plan is this: blow up the ship, grab air coolant, and leave, but probably not in that order, because that would be a way shorter movie. Parker and Lambert then go off on their way as Ripley goes off on her own way to get the escape ship ready. As she does, she hears Mrs. Kitty meowing, and I too could not leave Mrs. Kitty behind. So Parker and Lambert, they're getting the coolant, right? They make the most noise imaginable. It is insane. Like, I get that you're scared, but you need to not advertise your whereabouts as best you can. Also, another fun fact for you, it has been stated that these aliens like to scare humans on purpose. The increased blood flow when there are other like face huggers around increase the viability of the black goo pairing up with more blood flow because more cells in the area and more perfusion. So these things are being jerks on purpose, and that's why they slowly approach you and smile at you to let you absolutely lose your mind. Ripley continues looking for the cat as still Lambert and Parker continue to be bulls in china shops. Ripley then finds Jonesy as he's freaking out because he's extra angry as he's missed two meals at this point, which basically returns a cat back to feral status. So now Jones may be actively hunting the alien as well, we just don't know. And speaking of hunting, the alien slowly approaches Lambert, who sits there crying while Parker's like, "Get out of the way. Bro, tuck and roll. What are you doing?" But she elects to have a nice cry about it, as Parker has no choice because he can't use the flamethrower, so he has to physically attack the 7-foot-tall alien, which again, the flamethrower would have been 8,000% more effective. It then yeets Parker and then takes him out, while then turning to Lambert to take her out, all because you couldn't stop boo-hooing. Like, I get it, you're scared, but at some point you need to like have an active role in your own survival. And then there was 1.2, because cats have some of the personality traits of humans and are valuable little creatures. Ripley begins running around and finding the bodies not doing so well. She's now completely freaking out. She starts the self-destruct sequence to get out of there and then blow this thing up. We are also told for some reason that you can't override the explosion after 5 minutes. Why exactly? Seems like a bit of a design flaw, but who am I? I didn't design the ship. Grabbing Jonesy and giving the cat shaking cat syndrome inside its carrier, Ripley runs into the alien, but somehow it doesn't spot her. She returns back to the detonation room and tries to override the explosion. Also, that alien sees the cat but has no interest in it. The only part of the human condition that's in there is loving kitties. Ripley then yells at Mother saying, "I've turned the cooling unit back on," but is ignored because Mother doesn't care, as she gets angry and then starts destroying Mother, I guess. Returning back to the escape ship, she realizes, I gotta get out of here. She gets the cat, and also during this part of the movie, in movie theaters, it must have been a complete vibe check to see if you had epilepsy, because I didn't even know, like, last night watching this, I thought I was about to start seizing. Someone somewhere had their date absolutely ruined by this. But grabbing Jonesy again, the ship starts blowing up as she's able to get into the escape pod. Launching it, she blasts off and then clears the ship, as for some reason, it blows up 3 times. Someone was really proud of that explosion scene. Satisfied with her work, Ripley believes she has taken out the alien. Or has she? Putting the cat in the pod, it's extra angry with her, but the cat is pretty much immediately knocked out. And also, are these things rated for felines? I mean, they must be, but as Ripley strips down because it's the 70s and that's just how things are, she spots it. The alien is taking a nap in the ship, and somehow it didn't react to her doing all of that crap, which is a little strange. After a hand launches at her, she then runs to the closet where the suits are as the alien goes back to sleep. Even yawning, which is kind of interesting as this says this isn't just a Earth species thing, but is a universal thing. Why do we even yawn in the first place? Don't be fooled. Nobody is quite sure. Is it a social thing? Is it us cooling down our brain? Is it stabilizing the oxygen levels in our body? Who knows? But getting her suit on, the plan is to blow this thing out of the airlock. She loads a harpoon gun and then heads out to the main area. Sitting down quietly, she starts singing for some reason, and if I recall, I believe she was singing Whalers on the Moon Who Carry a Harpoon, I don't know. But she starts blowing gases out of pipes to wake the alien up. wakey wakey, it's time for school. She turns her back for some reason on the alien, who realizes that she's just sitting there, as then she opens the airlock. It gets pulled out, but then she fires the harpoon at it, knocking it out as it tries to crawl into an engine, which, good luck, buddy. And then she fires that engine, completely destroying the alien in the process and sending it out into space. So I think it's finally time to tell you what I actually believe the blood is at this point, since you have patiently waited long enough. So there are a few things we can surmise. First, if the facehugger was running on a limited supply of energy, it's entirely possible that the alien is doing the same thing, and that's what their pure genetics code for. Not to mention, it does not appear as though when the alien takes out a human, it invests any time or effort into eating them for energy. It's just purely hostile to anything that's not it. That would mean its metabolism is likely self-contained and not influenced so much by the need for food, but all the nutrients in its short lifespan will support is already within its body. It's sort of like a regular battery to a human's rechargeable battery. This is how the alien can exist in space for periods of time, whereas a human would absolutely be bodied because our metabolism is disrupted. Because of this, I believe the blood is actually a fluoroacetic acid of sorts. One of the important things to remember about the alien species is their bodies do not work exactly like ours. Within our metabolisms, our cells get energy they require through the metabolic cycle. We are reliant upon oxygen to be brought in to help facilitate the creation of energy as we breathe out CO2 as a waste product. Ultimately, this leaves us with adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for energy, to run our cells. From this point, functions like depolarization of neurons help us by sending signals to contract muscle, which also uses ATP, and move, and catch more food, and stay alive. Sunrise, sunset, everybody hold hands, sing kumbaya. It's great that it works. In aliens, however, they do not appear to breathe, hence why they can exist outside in the vacuum of space for an extended period of time. And this is where fluoroacetic acid composing their blood comes into play. This specific acid is said to have one of the highest abilities to conduct electricity. Along with that, I would propose that it is a trifluoroacetic acid, as this has a massive pH rating, which on the acid scale goes from like 1 to 7 usually, right? Well, this has a 0.23 pH. So it is just insanely acidic. It seems to me their energy production is all within their body from the time that they form. As this dwindles, so does their lifespan, which is why when there's no prey around, they appear to go in extremely deep sleep, as seen when Ripley is able to run and go get a soup without disrupting the alien, despite the fact that it was way more perceptive earlier when it assumed prey was around. The blood itself operates almost as like a nervous system of sorts, which doubles as a defense mechanism. It will conduct the electrical impulses of the body likely sent out by its brain, rather than using methods of like nerve-to-nerve connections like we do, so this highly conductive liquid all over its body allows for it to move and operate so long as the cells have the energy to do so. It's also likely it still doubles as a circulatory system as well, delivering nutrients from its own gas tank to all the cells that need it. But the question is, why do I believe it's fluoroacetic acid over something like hydrofluoric acid? Well, first, I have to acknowledge the proposed lore. These creatures would need Teflon bonds in their body to actually survive any of this stuff floating around. This allows for it to survive and also remain durable as it is, which is why it's hard to take them out. But in later installments, we see something that hydrofluoric acid cannot account for. Sometimes when you damage an alien drone with hot lead or fire, they will explode. Hydrofluoric acid is not explosive, but fluoroacetic acid is highly explosive. This colorless crystalline solid, under the right conditions, can also basically be entering a fluid state because it's soluble in water. And this would likely hail from a human genome, potentially owing some of its circulatory system characteristics to humans possessing plasma inside of their vessels, which then liquefies the acid, moving it around the body. In the facehugger variant, it's clear moisture is integral to their survival as well, as the eggs are housed in warm, moist environments. This water production is also seen within its saliva, where likely there are some digestive enzymes, but the amount produced would indicate the creature is producing a lot of moisture here as well, maybe even possibly as like a lubricant for like the little mouth that exits its face. But that's why I think it's trifluoroacetic acid. So then now she sends out a distress call telling her status, which isn't good, as she goes to take a 6-week nap in a pod, and thus concludes Alien. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be very baller of you and greatly appreciated. This was kind of a long one. Do you think the blood is trifluoroacetic acid, or do you believe it to be something else? Did I do this episode justice considering it took me 5 years, or do you now hate this channel and will tell me you're unsubscribing? Let me know down in the comments. Also, I'm bringing back merch with someone who makes good shirts. I will have that link here soon, and I'll be posting it in the descriptions. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the 3 bodies that were found after after the Jameson family disappearance. Like they all went missing and then later 3 skeletons just showed up. Nobody knows what happened to them or why it happened. It's pretty interesting, but speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, a huge thank you to our 2 astronauts, Rosie Kinch and Elliot Roska. Thank you guys very much. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist desk dancer, as well as our scientist, Chad the enjoyer of explanations of B-grade horror movies, Florian, Lacune, Lucian Dragon, and Octavia Serpentia. And the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping the channel running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.